2013. It's a flashpoint in the history of the Premier League. This is the year Manchester United won their 13th Premier League title. Imagine this! They won 13 of the first 20 Premier League titles. But why is that a flashpoint? Well, a season prior, another club from Manchester won their first ever Premier League title, and the fate of the two clubs flipped forever. This is the story of the two clubs from Manchester and how things have changed in the last decade. Consider subscribing to our channel. It's free and helps us a ton. Thanks. Before we get into the last 10 years, it is imperative to know how we got here. Premier League was established in 1992, usurping the Football League and changing English football forever. In 1986, the top clubs from Football League Division 1 threatened to break away from the league, resulting in their increased voting power and gaining more favorable financial arrangements. The constant threats of breaking away from the league didn't subside though. In 1988, the Football League's TV deal negotiations were under the cloud with the threat of 10 clubs leaving to form their own Super League. They were eventually persuaded to stay with the top clubs, gaining an even bigger share of the money from the deal. In 1990, Greg Dyke, the managing director of London Weekend Television, met with the representatives of the Big Five, namely Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal, Tottenham Hotspur and Everton, and proposed a breakaway from the Football League. Dyke believed that putting only the biggest clubs on television would be more lucrative for LWT, and the club representatives agreed. All they needed was the backing of the Football Association that at the time shared a fraught relationship with the Football League and thought of this as an opportunity to weaken their position. Long story short, under the FA, the Breakaway League was eventually established with 22 First Division teams participating. Football League, which operated with 4 divisions till now, would now operate as 3 divisions under the Premier League that would take the top flight status. Now, this is just the TLDR version of the whole saga, but let us know if you'd want a detailed version of the story of the establishment of the Premier League down in the comments. In the early years of the Premier League, Manchester United dominated with occasional challenges from Blackburn Rovers and Newcastle United. Manchester United won 4 of the first 5 Premier League titles, with one won by Jack Walker-backed Blackburn Rovers. 1997 saw the rise of a new challenger, Arsenal, under Arsene Wenger, and the next few years saw Manchester United in a fierce rivalry with Arsenal over the Premier League title. Between 1997 and 2004, Arsenal managed to win 3 Premier League titles, the last in 2004 in a record-breaking invincible season. But Manchester United remained the top dog, winning the other 4. Even after the rise of Roman Abramovich-backed Chelsea and constant threats from Arsenal and Liverpool, Manchester United kept dominating the league. This was the era of Big Four, with Chelsea winning 3 Premier League titles between 2004 and 2010. But even then, there was always one constant: Manchester United being close to the top of the Premier League. They went on to win back-to-back 3 Premier League titles from 2006-07 to 2008-09 seasons. The rise of Chelsea as a serious contender in the Premier League and Europe had other effects on the league. 2008 saw the Abu Dhabi-backed AUDG take over the blue side of Manchester, and by 2011 they were already turning into a serious challenger for the Premier League. Manchester United was still on the top, winning the 2010-11 Premier League title. But in one of the most dramatic seasons, the 2011-12 Premier League title went to Manchester City. They won the title on the last day of the season, equal in points with Manchester United, but they had a superior goal difference. We have made a detailed video on that Aguero goal that you can check out here. This brings us to 2013. The 2012-13 season saw Manchester United win the Premier League for the 13th time. 13 out of 20 Premier League titles. That's insane! What's even more insane is that this is the last time they won a Premier League title. In fact, I'll go as far as to say that this is the last time they were even a title contender. Since then, they have hardly been in the conversation of serious title contenders. But how did the mighty fall? What happened in the last 10 years? 2013 was the year Manchester United's most celebrated and legendary manager of all time, Sir Alex Ferguson, decided to call it a day on his managerial career after 27 years in charge of the club. Some may point to this as the beginning of a downward spiral that United has yet not been able to arrest. But the roots of the issues date further back. In 2005, Manchester United were taken over by the Glazers. According to most of the club's supporters, the American owners have proven to be the prime reason for their current downward spiral. But we'll get to that. The 2013-14 season was overseen by Sir Alex's hand-picked manager David Moyes and proved to be one of the worst seasons ever. Manchester United ended up in the 7th spot, 22 points adrift of the top. Since the inception of the Premier League, Manchester United had never finished below 3rd. So this was unheard of, and thus began the downslide and the beginning of the cycle of a managerial merry-go-round. David Moyes ended up being dismissed within 10 months of taking up the Manchester United job and was replaced by Louis van Gaal. The 2014-15 season went a step further for United, as this was their first trophyless season since the 2004-05 season. This was also the first season since 1995-96 that United had no European football. At least they were back in the top 4. 2015-16 wasn't any better. The season became more famous for Van Gaal's theatric dive on the sidelines in a match against Arsenal than anything on the pitch. United did end up winning the FA Cup, but that wasn't enough to save Van Gaal's job, as yet another disappointing European campaign and an outside of top 4 finish saw him dismissed at the end of the season. Out went Van Gaal, in came Jose Mourinho. At this time, Mourinho still had credit in the bank and wasn't as chastised as he is today. And in his first season, despite a mediocre league campaign that saw them ending 6th, yet another finish outside the top 4, United ended up winning 3 trophies: the Europa League, the EFL Cup, and if you want to count it, the Community Shield. 2017-18 season saw United go trophyless again, but at least their league position improved. They finished 2nd, just 19 points off the top spot behind, you guess who. To this date, Mourinho considers this one of his greatest achievements. However, by the middle of 2018-19 season, Manchester United was yet again in crisis, and it was clear that Mourinho had lost the dressing room. That meant yet another change in manager, this time mid-season. At the time of his dismissal, Manchester United sat 6th on the table. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was appointed as caretaker manager for the rest of the season and went on a 12-match unbeaten run that earned him a full-time managerial stint with the club despite a poor end to the season. United ended up 6th in the league and without a trophy. 2019-20 season saw United improve under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. In this pandemic-affected season, United ended trophyless yet again, but they reached 3 semi-finals, the FA Cup, the EFL Cup and the Europa League, and finished 3rd in the league. Never mind the fact that they ended 33 points off the top. There was genuine enthusiasm regarding their performances. Maybe Solskjaer was the answer. The next season under Solskjaer saw even more progress. They finished 2nd in the league, reached EFL Cup semi-final, and despite ending trophyless yet again, with something they had made a habit of by now, there was tangible progress. Well, 21-22 season happened and all that enthusiasm was flushed down the drain. The prodigal sons returned to Manchester United didn't quite go to plan, as they had a horrendous start to the season as they lost 5 of their first 12 matches, 3 of them at home. Solskjaer's time was over. Carrick came in for 2 months before Ralph Rangnick was appointed the caretaker manager. United huffed and puffed through the remainder of the season to 6th position, ending yet another trophyless season, their 5th on the trot. The trophy duck, however, was finally broken by Erik ten Hag-led United when they won the EFL Cup. Their league position also improved to 3rd. They went all the way to the finals of the FA Cup but lost to you know who. That brings us to the current season. It seems all the progress of the last season is already gone. 7 losses in the first 17 Premier League games, knocked out of the Champions League in the group stage, finishing dead last in the said group where they were guaranteed a knockout spot. Knocked out of the EFL Cup, and the only hope of a trophy remains in the FA Cup. As you can see, the last decade hasn't been kind to the red side of Manchester on the field. From perennial champions, they have turned into a side struggling to get into top 4. But how did we get here? This brings us to the point that a lot of United fans like to point to for the dire state of the club, the Glazers. Now, how are they responsible? Do they not back their managers in the transfer market? Well, on paper they do. Some of the most expensive signings in the last decade belong to Manchester United. Just in transfer fees, Manchester United has spent over £1 billion in the last decade and a half under the Glazers. From Paul Pogba for a reported £89 million to Anthony for a reported £82 million, they have spent a ton on transfer fees. I mean, they paid £80 million for Harry Maguire, for God's sake. Not only is that, they hand out bumper contracts. So what's not working? Well, the issue is obvious. There is no real strategy to any of this. From hiring people for positions they are clearly not fit for, looking at you, Ed Woodward, to neglecting the dire state of the academy and the stadium, it's clear that they care little about the club's well-being. A scattergun approach to recruitment where players' marketability may be more important to them than player fitting a system, giving out fat contracts to players past their sell-by date, which in turn means those players sit on those contracts for years, unable to be moved on. Seemingly, their motive is to extract as much money as they can from the club. Now let's contrast this with the blue side of Manchester, shall we? 2013-14 season saw Manchester City win their 2nd Premier League title under the tutelage of Manuel Pellegrini. Since the ADUG takeover, Manchester City had already become a serious title contender. However, the next season, Manchester City fell off a bit. Despite a good showing in the Champions League where they reached the semi-final for the first time, their league performances suffered, ending up 4th on the table. Pellegrini was already on his way out, replaced by one of the most celebrated coaches of modern era, Pep Guardiola. Now, before we proceed, we have to tell you that we have made a detailed video on the rise of Manchester City, which you can check here. Pep's first season proved to be disappointing as City ended the season trophyless, finishing 3rd in the league, knocked out in the round of 16 in the Champions League in the cruelest of fashions, and failing to win either of the domestic cups. Incidentally, this was the last time Manchester City finished a season trophyless. 2017-18 season saw City break all kinds of records, finishing the season at 100 points, the first Centurion season of any Premier League seasons. They also won the EFL Cup, making it a domestic double. The Champions League dream was still a dream though. The next season saw Manchester City go a step further, dramatically winning the league by 1 point. They also won the EFL Cup and the FA Cup, making it a domestic treble, or quadruple if you want to include the Community Shield as well. The Champions League was still a step too far. After winning back-to-back league titles, The 2019-20 season saw a blip in Manchester City's form as they failed to win the league, falling behind Liverpool by 18 points. The pandemic-marred season saw City win the EFL Cup and the Community Shield. However, the league form was back on track the next season, winning the domestic double yet again, which included the Premier League and the EFL Cup. This was also the season Manchester City broke beyond the quarter-final stage to reach the final, but ultimately failed to break the Champions League duck, falling to Chelsea. The domestic dominance of Manchester City continued as they won the Premier League yet again in the 21-22 season. However, this proved to be the only trophy this season as they failed to win any of the domestic trophies and were knocked out in the Champions League semi-finals in one of the most tragic fashions by Real Madrid. This led us to one of the most historic seasons of any Premier League clubs. The 22-23 season saw Manchester City do a United. They did their historic treble, winning their third consecutive Premier League title, their fifth in the last 6 seasons, the FA Cup, beating the crosstown rivals, and finally breaking the Champions League duck, beating Inter Milan in the final. The City had truly turned blue. As of making of the video, the 23-24 season hasn't gone to plan for City as they stand 4th in the league, 5 points off the top of the table. They are also out of the EFL Cup but have already won the UEFA Super Cup and the FIFA Club World Cup, making it 5 trophies in a calendar year. As we can see, the script between the two Manchester clubs has truly flipped. But how did Manchester do it? A lot of money, first of all. But I digress. See, again, before anybody says anything, yes, we are aware of the 115 charges and we have made a detailed video on the said charges which you can check out here. We will cross that line when the verdict comes. But beyond those, it has to be said that Manchester City have been shrewd in the market. Their transfer policy has been robust and clear and their academy is bearing fruits. The owners have made it clear that on-field success is their priority and this has been reflected in their actions. While Manchester United have had a merry-go-round of managers, Manchester City have had Pep lead them to unprecedented heights. This Manchester City domination is also reflected in the head-to-head in the last 10 years. While traditionally the derby results have been heavily skewed in favor of Manchester United, since 2013, Manchester City has been the favorite in derbies. In fact, Manchester United themselves contributed to Manchester City's greatest achievement ever when City beat them to win the FA Cup en route winning the treble. Now we can put as many asterisks and question marks around Manchester City's success, but the fact remains that on field, at this time, Manchester City is just the better team and off the field, a better run club. It truly seems like a competition between a club with no history against a club that seems to have no future. But what do you think? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching. Like if you liked it, share if you find it worthy, and subscribe. This is Salty Football.